Hey, welcome to this post-mortem edition of the Purple Journal podcast. I am your host, Joe Johnson of Purple PTSD for at least another year. At least we don't have to change that URL. And also I am the host of Vikings, or the owner of VikingsTerritory.com. Here with Joe Oberly, who is a writer for purplePTSD.com and the Sports Post, and also Luke Braun, who is a writer for Purple PTSD, Vikings Territory, and also the host of the Pocket Protectors podcast.
You youngsters.
Well, it's like the first thing I want to say is like naming all the things, like doing the introduction of the show, talking about like the websites we work with or that I own or that podcast that we're on. It's like all the work that we put into this team is based really in a love of the team, an emotional attachment to the team, even if we don't, not everyone here writes that way all the time. So it's just, games like that, it's just, it's such a complex range of emotions and reactions that you have when you have to get up and write about them the next day or that night, and trying to do it in a professional way and still maintain, in Joe's case, a press pass. So it's just really, not to say like poor us or that it's harder for us than anyone else, but it's just a kind of a unique perspective that I wanted to start the show off with, because I'm still relatively new to this. It's 2 seasons for me now, and I'll be honest, I guess I can start real quickly. My reaction was to the game. I wrote an article midway through the third quarter, basically titled that the team had broken our heart again, and that I was upset about it, but I was kind of numb to it. It took like 2 days for me to really realize, starting to see like all the Super Bowl stuff about Philly versus New England and the rematch from about a decade ago, that it hit me that like that could have been the Vikings and that I would have really enjoyed that, because I tried to rationally say, well, this is a good thing, because I was afraid that if I were to ever get a press pass that I wouldn't be able to control myself in a situation like the Minneapolis Miracle, where you're not supposed to really jump up and down or instinctually be like, yes, after a touchdown. Like, that's how I am, and I don't know if I can control that. That's something I've been wrestling with, and to me it was like, okay, well, I'm dead inside now, so I can watch the team and not really care.
I was already preparing Joe to the things I was going to say when that would happen. Say, I don't know him. I've never met him. I don't know.
As they're dragging me out and I'm shoving shrimp in my pockets from like the
Joe,
food.
Joe, I don't know Joe Johnson.
So yeah, that's just, initially I tried to rationalize it saying, hey, this is good, because now when we're in the playoffs next season, I don't really have to get emotionally wrapped up in it, because I know we're going to blow it, and I'm just waiting for that to happen. And so I know that's probably not the case, and I'll get over it eventually. But, Christ, I mean, it's just, I don't think any of us saw that coming, that type of game.
I didn't expect that. You certainly in the back of your head you have some fear, and you think all week that there's that lingering high that takes just a little bit too long for fans to get rid of, and certainly the players are human too, and there's going to be some effect there, whether you tell them not to or not. I mean, human beings are human beings, but speaking from a writer's perspective, it's certainly been good for me to have this gig to do it, because it's helpful, it's therapeutic. I mean, the first piece was really easy. I mean, it ended in the first half, so you start writing, and by the time the game's over, you're putting in the final score, and some quotes, and it's you can be detached. You can write that one. Well, the next day I get up and I'm starting to get a little more pissed off, and so that was the second piece I wrote. Okay, how did this defense do this? What the heck happened here? What's going on? Trying to figure it out, listening to quotes from players and coaches and trying to make some sense of it. And the emotions are creeping in, and then my third piece that I just wrote today, I talked about talking over the game with my son and how it really put it back into some context and some for me, and I actually started to find peace with a little bit. Just how if you read it, I talked about how I used to do the same thing with my dad. I'd call him after every Vikings game. Well, that's what my son and I have been doing for the past few years, and he said some things to me that just it's not the end of his world, it's not the end of mine, but it is part of our world. So it's really kind of neat, and you just kind of say, well, this is what it is, and there it is, move on. So the writing has been therapeutic. It's been good to be able to do it, but because you do get to get your emotions out about it. And it sucked. It sucked in the biggest way.
It was great to see your stuff too, and I shared it with my parents because, we kind of tease you a little bit on here about being the more rational. Well, Luke's the analytical mind, but you are the type of person that always calms me down when I get mad. Like earlier in the season, when with the injuries and some of the titles that I chose for the show. It was like, similar stuff that my dad was telling me, which is it's a long season, calm down, it's not the end of the world. And so I kind of expected to see that from you. Maybe not the night after, but the day after, saying, well, let's pick up the pieces and this is a young team and let's look at next season. But it was great to see just the emotional side of it and to see that, like, from my perspective, I guess that some of my feelings are validated in terms of just feeling bad about it.
We don't do this just because it's a high-paying gig. No offense, Joe, but we do it because we love the team. And every sports writer you meet, and they all profess it on the air and in their pieces or whatever, and say they don't. They're objective. They don't care about the team, and to a certain degree, that is true. And certainly, while you're doing your work, but every goddamn one of them, to a man or a woman, has got into it because they love it. Either they love the team or they love the sport, and they love, the whole process. So that's in there somewhere. And on a game like that, it's gonna, you're getting excited to possibly see him in the Super Bowl. And the legs are taken out from under you, boy, that's a blow. It's a blow, and those emotions are going to bubble up. They're going to start working their way to the surface, and so it's legit. And I'm not going to lie and say there's not part of me as a fan of this team, because it is. I grew up with it. It's part of me, and as professional as I try to be in everything I write, when I think and talk and feel about this team, it's honest. It's there. I can't ignore it. Lie if it would be.
Can I throw a little perspective at you guys?
Do it.
Sure.
Please.
Obviously it hurts, and it's the most painful one in the forefronts of our minds because it just happened, and because we really all thought, this could happen. We could get this home Super Bowl, and there's all this on the line. I think we'll talk more about actually what went on in the game, but I think what went on in the game is a pretty easily fixable mistake. Not like some systemic thing that we have to tear everything down and build it all the way back up to get rid of. And I think that the team that we come out of this season with is in so much of a better position than where we were a year ago, that it's definitely not inconceivable to think that we can, put together a similar season. I kind of always thought that 13-3 was an overachievement. Like this is a good team, but it's not like 13-3 like Patriots good. But that's okay, because that means when you regress to the mean, when you're regressing from 13-3, your regression to the mean is to 11-5 and still a playoff team. And that's great.
But why?
I talked a lot about it before the playoffs on this show about like how there's like 7 or 8 teams and one of them gets to win the Super Bowl, but all of them are good enough. And as long as it's like what Zimmer said about, we just got to keep knocking on the door. Eventually we'll knock that thing down. As long as we're one of those 8 teams, and I think we can be for a bunch of years now, we'll have a shot every time. And I think that helps to soften the blow for me. As frustrating as it was to watch them just get whooped by a team that isn't as good as the other teams that have beat us in NFC Championship games.
Yeah, but you didn't have a press pass to the Super Bowl to watch your home team in their home stadium.
I had an outside shot at getting tickets.
That's true, and all of us are fans because of a connection to our dad. Luke's dad is a super fan. He's been at a lot of these games. And so we kind of see it from that perspective. But, maybe this is a good question now that you brought that up, Luke, because the way I look at it is, okay, in my lifetime, every time we've had a shot like this, it takes us a minimum of 2 to 3 years, as was the case from 98 to 2000, to, almost 8 or 9 years to get back to this opportunity. And beyond that, I think this was a special opportunity. I think a lot of the things that aren't necessarily going to repeat themselves next season or the season after that were kind of in the Vikings' favor. Not just the home Super Bowl, but all the injuries that happened this year across the league that made it a little easier to get further. I'm not sure if that's why.
It did. Green Bay stepped out of our way. I mean, that would have been a battle for that division.
Dallas was missing Zeke. I was going to ask you, Luke, what specifically you thought was the reason that they overachieved, because I felt like maybe, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but from hearing that from other people, it's the quarterback play was a surprise, but the defense was the defense, and we have a good, having a good defense, it's going to put us into the conversation every single year, but to lose a game like that, not solely because of the defense, the turnovers kind of created a lot of momentum, put the defense back out on the field, took points off the board. It just, to me, looking at it that way, feeling like maybe to have a defense collapse mentally the way that they did, to go against like what seemed to be their entire game plan, which was in Joe's article, so I don't want to pretend like I came up with this, but to not on a play-to-play basis try to win the game on every play or overachieve, to trust the people next to you, and to have people like Harrison Smith, like just all the defensive leaders, all pro guys, having Troy Aikman say stuff like, Harrison Smith is running around like he doesn't know what's going on. Like, to hear that's
two different questions, because like the actual reason that like Harrison Smith was bad is different, but like in terms of overachieving, just to get to that before we get too far past it, I think part of it was just the state of the NFC, where probably the two best quarterbacks in the NFC, or two of the top quarterbacks in the NFC, I mean, in Wentz and Rodgers, went down and weren't in the playoffs. And not to mention, guys like Cam Newton didn't have the best situation around him. He had no receivers. That's going to change. But I also think that, like, we had Case Keenum was like the 9th to 11th-ish best, I guess, quarterback in the league. Maybe you could put him at like 6 or 7 if you're really optimistic, which is pretty good. But that's not that's like that can get you to 11-5. Having that get you to 13-3 is overachieving. I also think putting up the defensive performance that we put up is going to be really hard to replicate, even though they'll still be very good. 13-3 is 1-2 seed, one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the league. And I don't think the offense was to a caliber where they can just like run it right back. And they're not going to run it back, and they don't really have a choice about that because Pat Shurmur went to the Giants. But that's why I think that they overachieved a little bit, because the team was, we're talking about, I think they were an 11-5 team, not a 13-3 team. I don't think the difference between those two is particularly detrimental. And if they like suddenly pumpkin into the team they really are, that's still an 11-5 team that's probably winning the division and playing a home playoff game.
So is your point that people shouldn't be as upset because the team wasn't this unstoppable juggernaut that blew it? Or is it that...
Exactly.
Okay, so you're putting it in perspective. Things. I get it.
That's the perspective. They weren't this like juggernaut like the 98 team, right? That had the chance and blew it. They were a very good team. They also aren't like a rental team. I always thought of like the 98 and the 2009 teams, and this is why when I wrote the piece about ranking the NFC Championship losses by pain, I put 98 and 2009 first and second, because those teams felt like guns with one bullet in the chamber. where they had one shot, and if they didn't get it, they were going to fall apart immediately. Like, after 98, it took, 2 years? Like, when did John Randall leave the team? I forget. But, like, a lot of key players, like, left after that year or after 99. And, like, after 2009, by 2 years from that season, like, by the end of 2010, the coach was gone, Favre was gone, a bunch of key members of the defense were gone, and suddenly we were, like, rooting for Asher Allen and Chris Cook and Christian Ponder, and we were, like, a totally different unit. I don't think
That happened in 2002, with Denny Green resigned halfway through the next season, Chris Carter left, Corey Stringer died. Like, that was just, like, a horrible time.
And even, like, between 98 and 2000, that was, like, suddenly a young team with a totally differently composed defense, and Dante Culpepper.
This one's built to last, right?
This one's built to last. The defense is locked up. Rhodes is locked up. Smith is locked up. Joseph is locked up. Barr, Kendricks, Hunter, all those guys we have all the cap room in the world to lock them up and still deal with the quarterback situation. Zimmer, I would be shocked to see a transformation over the next 2 years like we saw, from like 2000 to 2001 or in, 2010 in that disastrous season. I would be really shocked to see the team turn over like that. So I think you can more or less run it back.
Don't you be raining on my funeral now.
Well, I want to ask if this is an overreaction because, I was in the car with my dad and he was, for 2 days he was just nonstop ranting he was really mad about Anthony Barr in particular, and I think that had to do with the fact that he went to bed before halftime and he saw Barr get completely just burned on a play by Selleck. So he didn't see a lot of the second half stuff where there was just, Trey Waynes on the flea flicker or the Harrison Smith stuff with Selleck also. My point to him, because he was saying a lot of the same thing, like they'll be back next year and you'll be back next year. Just wait. He kept telling me that, like it'll get better. And my thing was that, my reaction to it was this defense, and this, even saying this, I know it sounds super hyperbolic and hyper negative, but to fall apart like that when in a game that matters for a team that historically only gets a shot once a decade, and to have the stars align for us to have a shot like that, it's like maybe there's just a problem with that defense not being able to come together in big games like that, or there's a leadership issue.
Do you want to talk about why? Why I think the defense
totally,
fell apart
because that ties into that. Because it's like, what happened to have a team like with that many leaders and that many all-pro guys like fall apart that way? Like it just seemed to me like
right. It
what
doesn't
the
make
hell,
sense, right? Because that can't be what happened. Like you can't. Harrison Smith isn't bad now. Like that's ridiculous. Get that thought out of your head.
I don't think he's bad. I just think maybe they're not big game guys, and some teams are great.
Get that thought out of your head. That's narrative bullcrap. This outdoor, they can't play on grass. To get all of that bullcrap out of your head, here's what happened. Mike Zimmer overthought it, and that's a big mistake. I still think he's a top 5 coach, but he made a huge mistake, and he started this mistake at the end of the Saints game, and we saw, Drew Brees suddenly could magically move the ball because he moved away from the man concepts and the 4-man pressure and the just like suffocate you every play thing that made the defense so good. He tried to basically take away passing lanes using zone. So he really started to play like a more spatial game. That's not what the Vikings are good at, and that's not what they were built to be good at. They were built to be able to man you up, and just like Xavier Rhodes is just going to take away your best guy, and that's just how they do it, and they were able to do that the whole season. They switched to more zone concepts. And I think this was in an effort to beat the RPO thing that the Eagles do. But the problem was the linebackers bet a little too much on play action, and then the Eagles got a little momentum going, and then there was like kind of a panic element where they decided to switch back to like, no, just commit to the slant. Like there was a double move. Alshon Jeffrey got wide open on a long bomb touchdown. And it was a double move that was a slant and go, or a sluggo, and you could tell Terrence Newman had been instructed to just commit to the slant because it took him like 2 steps to react to Alshon Jeffrey's move. His hips were turned and he was in. That to me says that, oh crap, we're getting beat by these slants because we tried to do this like take away your passing lanes type offense.
Yeah, and that was, I think, what was initially a lot of stuff on Twitter, especially, was they every it was that slant pass across the middle. They couldn't stop it, and everyone's like, why can't
they couldn't stop it
that?
because
Well, then
they
how
were
come
being instructed to funnel those inside, to basically say, okay, yeah, let Alshon Jeffrey have inside leverage. Anthony Barr will be there to take the inside away, but Anthony Barr wasn't there because he bid on the play action.
Yeah.
But Zimmer also said that he was sticking with things that worked well too long, and that's where he was taking blame for what he did in the game, which kind of is counter to what you're saying there. He said
I think that describes the mentality he had, and I hope he learns from that.
Because I heard him say also, not to interrupt you guys, but this is kind of part of it, that the slant stuff was what they practiced to stop, but the Eagles just executed better than they did. So to me,
the other thing is Nick Foles was good, and he hasn't been good before. Like, Nick Foles was excellent, and that's a huge surprise, and it makes sense for them to game plan for a quarterback that's going to make mistakes and to try to capitalize on that, and then when he doesn't make those mistakes, you get duped. And Doug Peterson was always a step ahead as well. When they started committing more to the slants, he was able to move to start going to double moves and more aggressive stuff, and that's a huge credit to Doug Peterson and the whole offensive coaching staff over there.
Do you discount any emotion or lack thereof affecting this performance?
I do. I get that emotion is part of the game, but it's very clear that they were schematically in really bad positions all the time. It's not like they weren't playing hard. It's not like the problems that were
not playing hard.
Because of
playing hard, just not. This, you've heard me say it before, and I'll say it again until I'm blue in the face. It's a huge. You have to be up. You have to be emotionally ready. Now, I'm not sure what that is. I've never played football on this level, but I know that you can't beat your brains out every week in this sport and be up to your peak performance every week. And they were outside of themselves last week, and it's part of it. I'm not saying that's why they lost, but it's part of it. And then you look at it and this is something my son said to me, which I thought was pretty good, was the Eagles had nothing to lose. They sat there with the dogs on their heads. They're underdogs. Yeah. They can go out there and be as aggressive as hell. They can go out there and just play like if we lose, there is no pressure. It's okay. We're not supposed to win. Nobody's picking us. They haven't for 2 weeks. And they ate that up and put it out on the field. And I'm sorry, but the Vikings didn't. They come on in there with all the pressure. We got to win this on the road, on turf or whatever, to go home and play in the dome. And Zimmer had been telling them, you're not leaving here. That's what he told them when the playoffs started. You're not leaving here. All the games are going to be there. So I think that was a part of it as well. And, schematically, I applaud you. What you're saying is sound, and I'm not trying to discount that. But if the emotion of the game and how they came out is not factored in, then I would just disagree.
Well, that ties into too.
I mean, I want to respond to that because, of course, it makes some bit of a difference. But what I'm saying is that the team being emotional or not, it's not like they were running any slower than they usually do. It's not like they weren't hitting as hard as they usually do. They were not put in a position to succeed. I think either way, it's chalked up to Zimmer. I just don't think that they came out with a plan that was very smart.
Yeah.
And they should have known, Zimmer should have known better. He saw this not work emphatically, and then he took the exact same defensive game plan. Not to mention the offensive game plan and the offensive line shuffle was the same thing, where he just kind of outthought himself. He took Mike Remmers and put him at a way less valuable position.
Well, I don't want to. Well, there's lots. Okay. So what I was going to ask to tie into that, since you kind of summed it up by saying it's a Zimmer thing, Joe, you said in one of your articles this week that you would take a Neil Bud Grant. You're not ripping Bud Grant by any means, but the critique of him. Which applies sort of to Denny Green, too, since he had a reputation of having good teams that just couldn't finish in the playoffs, is that, it was that emotional aspect, not getting up for games against these AFC upstart teams like the Chiefs. Mm-hmm. And so it ties back to my question. Maybe I put it on the wrong people by saying, the defense needs a leader, like a Ray Lewis type person that is going to put them, in the best position to win.
4.
But when they have the opportunity, and I'm saying that maybe that was the wrong assessment. Maybe you have to look at Zimmer and say, okay, this is one example. You can't pin the 2015 game on him by any means, but Zimmer needs to, in the future, really kind of wash that stink off of himself. Otherwise, that could end up being his legacy as the coach, which we've dealt with before. So,
and the thing is, though, Zimmer's so much more emotional than Bud Grant ever was, and so I mean, while I think they both failed at getting their charges, properly ready for this game emotionally, I think it may be for different reasons, because I'm sure Zimmer is fire and brimstone, where Bud Grant basically just said, well, we've prepared, we're this, we know what we're doing, go out there and do it. And I think that back then hurt him and the Vikings team. And, I'm not going to, like I said, once again, I'm not discounting everything Lucas said about scheme and everything else. That is ultimately how they get beat. But after that second fumble and the touchdown, or the second score after it, and the score right before half, the emotion, that team is gone. I don't care what scheme you're going to throw out there. They aren't going to do well with it.
Yeah, the arbiter, as trying to be like the arbiter of this conversation, I think you're both right, because clearly it was like a systems failure. Like, everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. I think in Joe's defense of his argument, there was just certain things you saw from players that didn't seem like things we'd seen before, like not a panic, but kind of just like a what the hell is going on. And if that's on Zimmer for like installing a defense that we didn't either run or have success with during the season and getting away from what this defense is all about, then that's a pretty strong indictment, and it pisses me off, to be honest, because it's like, he is a genius when it comes to this sort of thing. And Doug Peterson, he didn't get a whole lot of shine when he got hired. I think he was named one of the worst hires of the year, and I'm not to say that he
locked in Coach of the Year, though.
Yeah, totally.
Now,
I mean, he
totally.
Like, if that's a chess game, that's like Bobby Fischer against me, basically. And that disappoints me, and that also makes me worry about the future, because it's like, okay, he got beat that bad 6 quarters
I don't
in a
think
row.
you have to worry about I don't think you have to worry about the future, because I think that that's something that Zimmer can go look back at, and that the fix for that is you just don't do that anymore. Yeah. It's not like, oh no, my scheme has this horrible hole that now is exposed. I've seen the word exposed a lot, and it really pisses me off, because it's like this scheme has this fatal flaw that the Eagles have figured out, and now they'll go. It's like, well, the scheme has a fatal flaw when you don't run the scheme. Yeah, stop doing that and go back to the thing that actually worked.
Yep.
And you'll be just as good as you were before.
And that, I think, was
so. I think it's a really easy fix that makes me think that the defense will be just fine in the future, because just don't do the new dumb thing, do the old smart thing.
I wrote this, and I agree with you, Luke. I don't fear for the future, because for a couple reasons. A, Zimmer, he's seen from the last 2 seasons, he's not this immovable object that just will, this is the way I'm doing it, that's the way it is.
He's not Norv Turner.
Yeah. And the other thing is, look at the guy's done with this defense since he's been here. I feel like as long as he's on this team, coaching this team, they're going to have a good defense, and that's going to put him in the conversation, and they're viable. I mean, they are. Like, they're locked up mostly in contracts, like Luke was saying. They're good. They're going to tweak it some more. They're going to get, something else in there that they need, to reload. But so I agree with you, Luke. I'm not worried for the future. I just, and I don't know enough about schemes to like you do, to say what the hell went wrong. But I know is sure as shit that there was a brain malfunction going out on that field too. There was people getting out of their lanes, trying to do everything, make big plays, and win the game with one play. And to see Harrison Smith get bit so badly on a down, out, and down, it's stuff I run into the Sandlot when I play with my friends. It's like, God, where's that come from?
Yeah, that to me comes from game plan, and it comes from getting in the film room and saying, hey, they never break this out, you can safely commit to it. And then for the first time ever, Zach Ertz broke up, and Smith was totally not ready for it.
Yeah.
And with a blowout like that, with a team that was as good as the Vikings are getting blown out like that, it has to be a confluence of factors. Totally. None of this stuff is mutually exclusive. It's game plan and it's strategy, but it's also emotion, and it's also, maybe it is because teams who have been indoors and then play outdoors in the playoffs are 0 and whatever, like these dumb stats that I keep seeing. But ultimately, the team had a chance and failed. And you know what? That happens a lot. That happens to 11 teams a year, where they have a chance, they get in the playoffs, and then they fail. That doesn't mean that you have to tear it all down. I'm already seeing like Zimmer on the hot seat stuff from some of the real bad rubes, and it's like I need to calm those people down.
So I have to cancel that article for the morning?
Please, God,
no,
cancel
I'm
that
totally
article.
kidding. I'm not. My mindset is more that I just don't know if we're gonna if just based on my life experience with this team, I feel like maybe it'll be another 8 years before I see them in another NFC
These
championship.
ain't your Brad Childress Vikings.
Well, see, and that was the title of my article. Was that, all season I've been calling this the most anti-Vikings team I've ever seen, and so it was this anti-Vikings team broke our heart, and they're just like a regular Vikings team would. But having said that, I do think that they obviously are. They were set up to continue to be a good team. I mean, there is a lot of variables that we're going to get into in a second here with Shurmur leaving, with the quarterback position, with the draft, with free agency, adding pieces. This team is stacked. Dalvin Cook coming back. There's a lot to be positive about. It's just it takes the wind out of your sails when stuff like that happens. And I did want to note something that Joe put in one of his maybe the Monday article that I think generated a lot of Joe's viewpoint and maybe other people's viewpoints on this, and I'm not saying it's on the team or how they handled the loss, because they are coached to say certain generic football speak things after a loss or after a win, just to not create controversy. But Joe, you had mentioned that, I don't remember the player's name specifically, but he basically just said, well, they wanted it more than we did, and your response was, how the hell does that happen? When you have a chance,
out of here with that platitude.
I heard that on the radio, and I couldn't find who said it, and so I kind of said, yeah, I'm going with it anyway, because I know I heard it, and I go, are you bloody kidding me? How could you not want this?
Has that ever been said and meant anything?
Yeah,
that is the most meaningless, stupid phrase
and
that you say after every freaking game.
And it sounds bad in that context, because it's like, how could you not want
Get out of here.
more? So you're admitting that that's admitting the other team actually tried harder or wanted it more when you had a chance to play the Super Bowl at home. That's not a good thing to say either.
Dumb crap so the dude with a microphone will get out of your face.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it was.
I don't buy that at all.
It sounds so bad in that context that it's just stupid to have said it.
But have you guys never swam upstream against your emotion?
I do that.
Sure.
That's why I sleep till 5.
That's what we're talking about here. Sometimes the emotion of the moment gets the most of you, and no matter how much you know, how much you've practiced, no matter until something good happens, you're swimming upstream, and it's I don't know. I think that was a huge part of it, but
it's a good experience for a future playoff appearance as well. Like, just to have, especially since so many these people are coming back. Like, if it's January 2019 and you're going into a divisional game against the Rams, you've kind of got that hey, don't stay up, be up for it.
Yeah,
you all kind of just know.
I really loved how Zimmer said in last week, remember how you felt at the end of the Saints game when you thought we lost, and use that to drive you in the Eagles game, so we never have to feel that way again this year. And clearly that didn't end up happening, but you have a good point, Luke. This could be either a very good teachable growing moment for a semi-young team to say, like, we need to build on this, and we've almost got there, and historically teams have done that before, or they can completely implode.
Let me ask you about that, both of you, and I suppose it goes back to emotion, but there are numbers out there, and I agree with you, Luke, that the 0-13 outside BS, that no teams from the past mean anything about the teams going forward.
Exactly.
But how I do believe there is what's the term? What's the cliche? Not the curse.
The hangover?
The hangover. The Super Bowl hangover. I mean, the Falcons went through. Falcons came back. They started playing good really for just a short period of time, but it still wasn't good enough. They didn't make it all the way back. But there's so many times people go to the NFC Championship, lose, and then they
disappear,
peter away.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's very possible that two of the teams could do that, since a year ago, one was 3-13, and the Vikings, what were they, 8-8? I mean, do you expect the Jaguars and the Vikings to be right back in the NFC Championship next year?
No idea about the Jags, because they have to decide if they really want to believe in Blake Bortles, and I worry about that team falling for, he got us to the AFC Championship, as if he had anything to do with that. for the Vikings, though, I guess I'll go back to what I said before about, like, we have more bullets in the chamber than one. You get all these guys coming back, and like, I don't know, man. I think we can be one of those 7 or 8 again. And only 2 of those 7 or 8 get to go to the Super Bowl, and the rest of them have to sit there and go, God, we were good enough. What happened? It's somebody has to lose these games. And the way to win is not to go all in or to be a juggernaut for 1 year, because it doesn't matter how good you are. You can still have Gary Anderson miss a field goal. The way to win a Super Bowl is to knock on the door year after year after year after year, build something that is good and to last, not something that is necessarily you blow your whole load in 1 year and is the best once. Give me something that is up there with everybody else and lasts.
And you don't buy the narrative that the Vikings should go all in for Drew Brees because they are built to win now.
I kind of would love just to see Drew Brees because that would be amazing. I don't think it would be too much of an all-in. I think they have the cap room to spend on it.
And if that guaranteed a Super Bowl and then we were terrible for 10 or 12, I would be terrible for 20 years if we could win a Super Bowl.
But that just flies in the face of what you just said, Luke, because you're right.
I don't think it would be an all-in.
What you said was right. And, I think it's comical that people even talk about it. They're not going to let him go. And it's just like, a farm. He's got probably 1, maybe 2 good years left. Who knows?
Especially with the Saints being a miracle play away from
yes. Why would you do that to you?
That opens up a question about, like, Kirk Cousins, which I would love to have maybe next week on the show.
Absolutely not.
Luke and I. Common ground, absolutely.
Absolutely not. He's about $90 million too expensive.
To answer your question, Joe, yeah, I feel like I don't make a lot of super declarative statements on this show just because I'm the type of person in real life that is very, despite all the evidence to the contrary, rational, and I don't really enter into arguments that I don't have the bullets in the chamber, to use Luke's analogy, which is probably a bad analogy for Vikings fans right about now. To really say one thing against what you guys are saying, I just feel like emotionally that I wouldn't be surprised if this team ended up with, there's a reason that hangover exists. Losses like this do enter into the psyche of the players. Obviously, otherwise those statistics wouldn't exist. The history of it wouldn't exist. So, I do think that this team is, as is right now, it could make a decent playoff run next season. I just wouldn't be surprised if things just started off like 0-4 next season either, just because of the way things are. That is a good segue, though, because that assumes that we have a lot of the same players, namely the quarterback that we have right now on the roster.
New team every year.
So
they get hung over because you've been telling them all year, you're special. I love this team. This team is special. They're special.
Team of destiny. Yeah.
And next year it's going to be different. And next year you're going to look across the room at 3 or 4 different new faces that weren't here last year, and you're going to say, "Oh, I guess we weren't that special last year." And anyway, I'm sorry.
And then it goes. I think too, part of it is like at the beginning of the season, they kind of realized like what a grind it was to get to like where they were. The instant gratification from week to week isn't there, and maybe they're accustomed to that just by the success that they had the year before, and that's part of it.
It's all very apocalyptic when there's like 5 or 6 teams in the league that are good every year. Why can't we also be one of them?
Well, that's the broader question. Then is, I think the difference is that there's such parity in the NFL that a lot of teams this season, especially in the AFC shows, that get into the playoffs that maybe quote unquote don't deserve it, and that's why there's such a turnover in regards to new playoff teams every year. But there are teams like the Seahawks or the 49ers under Harbaugh, or obviously the Patriots, that are there every year, and they're there for a reason. And that's because they're good, and they bring in good pieces in the offseason to sustain what is good. And the Vikings have been good at that.
Yeah.
I do think the Vikings have been successful in replenishing talent, keeping starters on defense. They did a decent job of rebuilding the offensive line. I think that's something they obviously have to focus on this offseason. But we should talk about the other big elephant in the room outside of the collapse, which is, Teddy on Monday, it was reported, said something about how he expects to be a starter next season, which started this whole thing with Teddy wants out of Minnesota. I don't know if that was his point. I doubt it.
It wasn't at all. That's people making crap up.
Yeah, totally. But
I mean, he would test the market. He would test the market if Minnesota was like, "Hey, you're not going to start for us, but you're welcome to be a backup." I think he would leave.
Absolutely. He said he's going to start somewhere. He didn't know where. That's all he said.
Yeah, and
yeah, he just believes in himself.
Yeah, I mean, well, he has to too. I mean,
right.
If it's a business,
it's the NFL.
There you go. So I guess the question I'll ask you, Luke, first is just what.
Oh, he's just gonna throw numbers at it. Don't ask him.
Stats are for losers.
What do you nerd? What do you think is the? Well, I wanted to ask like a juicy take that was going to be, who do you think the starting quarterback for the Vikings is going to be? But that's just a ways out there. What do you think the process is going to be just in the next couple of weeks?
Well, here's the deal. I think the process will be dependent on the OC hire, whoever we get to replace Shurmur. I mean, if we're going to go like with an air raid college guy or like a John Morton who's an air raid guy, then maybe they do want to work to retain Case Keenum because that's like his most comfortable scheme. If they're going to try to be more West Coasty and preserve what they had in Pat Shurmur, well, that fits best with Teddy's skill set. If they want to go like with an Air Coryelli kind of thing, go back to what they had with Norv, that's best for Sam's skill set. It depends on what they do. I don't think the Bradford thing's going to happen, but if they did, that's what they would want. So I think it depends on what scheme they're bringing in and what that offensive coordinator is going to need in a quarterback, because the skill sets across all three people, vary a little bit. I think just looking at the comments that like Zimmer has made and the comments that the team has made, it doesn't sound like they're very committed to Case Keenum at all, and it doesn't sound like Case Keenum is committed here at all. I think, and just empirically, it behooves Case Keenum a lot to test free agency. Because, if he's here, he'll be competing with Teddy and or someone else, if we draft a mid-round, whoever. I think if he goes to, Arizona, he's just the guy. And I think he would rather want that, and I think Arizona would be more willing to pay him more than we're willing to pay him. So it makes sense for Keenum to test free agency. I don't think it makes as much sense for Teddy to test free agency
at all,
because to the rest of the league, he's a guy that hasn't been on a football field in really any meaningful way for 2 years.
And what's up
to the Vikings, he's a guy that's practiced in front of the coaches and they know him and they still like him, and the way that they talk about him, the way Zimmer talked about him in the last couple press conferences seemed like they still really believe in him. And I don't think any other team believes in him nearly as much as the Vikings do. So I think it makes a lot of sense for Teddy to take a short-term prove-it contract here rather than go try to test free agency and be like the ninth best option that ends up being a backup for the Jets.
Yeah, Joe, can I jump in here?
Yeah, well, real quick, I just wanted to say, just to put a bow on Luke's thing too.
I'm just about to attack it. What do you mean?
Well, the team is just closer to the injury than other teams are, so, I mean, that's such a huge question mark too that you can't imagine he'd have a huge incentive-laden contract, you'd have to think, just based on that. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I bet there'd be incentives on it. I think you have to make some level of commitment just because he wants, he's your first round, he's your guy, and if you give him, we'll pay you $500,000 unless you're really good, I don't know if his agent would let that fly. But yeah, some level of...
It's all market-driven too, though. I mean,
stuff.
Who knows? If teams don't really want to give him that much, that could happen. But anyway, Joe, what were you going to say?
Last night, I was going back and forth with Purple Buckeye from the Daily Norseman. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a good guy. And he was talking about didn't want to see Darryl Bevell in here. And
oh, God.
I discovered something about myself, and I think, the difference between...
I love this.
Introspective.
It is, man. That's what football's all about, damn it.
I as a reporter, I tend to go more towards reporting and thinking commenting on what I think the team is doing as opposed to what I think they should do. And bloggers do a little bit more of what they want, and maybe people that are out there, commenters, I should say. So I think I kind of disagree with you, Luke. I think by listening to the comments from Zimmer, I think they're I consider Zimmer a straight up guy for the most part, and has a lot of trouble obfuscating and lying to the press. And I think he's setting it up to bring Sam Bradford back as the quarterback, because he has said more than once he is he's the purest passer they have on the team. And when they asked him about Teddy the other day, he was hedging, saying, well, we looked at this injury and there was 24 of them in all of sports. Half of them never returned, and another small never, were gone or something. It's very few people. Because the fact that he's back here within a year, he said everybody else did not get back until 2 years, right?
I thought that was more of a testament to like how amazing his rehab has been.
That is correct. But that to me, I read it as he's kind of, setting up the loss here. He said, we aren't expecting him back for 2 years to play. So maybe they're going to try to lowball him and bring him in and say, you can be the backup here if you want, so that you get the opportunity to prove it. But I think they want to bring back. I agree with you on Case. There's been nothing there, and you can see that in his face. But I think they're looking to. They're convinced that Bradford's knee is good. They spent a lot on him, and
that's
they're
true.
Gonna bring him back.
I would. That would be awesome. I would really support a training camp where you have Teddy and Sam Bradford in a straight up quarterback competition. I think we're all in agreement that it just doesn't seem realistic to even keep Case Keenum unless you throw like just a true franchise contract at him, which he'll never do. I just don't think he'll accept anything, and he'll go test the market because it's just the best thing for him.
And they did. I want to say a couple of things here, but they did kind of. I know the rationale was that maybe Zimmer thinks that Keenum plays better when he's uncertain or has that edge, but it'd be understandable to see Case Keenum not want to return, or to kind of be like, you know what, I'm going to take more money elsewhere and screw the Vikings because I did everything they asked me to do, and still. Before the Saints game and before the Eagles game, the head coach was talking about whether or not he was going to put Bradford in the game if they got down because he's a better passer than me. I could see that happening. Joe brought up a good point when it comes to Bradford, which was my other point, which was that they did put, obviously give up that first-round pick for him, so just to let him go if his knee isn't as bad as maybe we thought we was.
First, fourth, and seventh.
There you go. I know we worried a lot about the word degenerative on this show, thinking that maybe he has arthritis and it's just going to get worse and worse. And with that, coupled with the surgeries,
that did not bear out. He looks totally fine.
So, hey, I'll just say I've always been a big Bradford guy. We've talked about that. I don't think Teddy, he was improving. Obviously, I was getting more and more sold on him before his injury, but I don't think tape-wise he's ever done anything that Bradford has done in this offense, or that even Keenum has done to justify some sort of like super investment in him versus someone else if they have confidence that Bradford is also healthy. So
you guys are right. How is any other team going to pay him a boatload of dollars until they see him on a field against competition outside of his own defense that can't hit him because he's got a red jersey on? They can't.
Yeah.
Nobody in their right
same
mind
thing with Teddy.
That quarterback hungry.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same benefit that the Vikings have with Teddy. So right now, we have $22 million for the 2017 season. We have $22 million tied up in the quarterbacks. I think you could take that, maybe throw 3 or 4 extra million in there, and I think for like 25 to 27, you could probably end up with Bradford and Teddy and a lot of incentives in there. I think. I think you could get that to work, dividing that money between those two without spending too much more on the quarterback position than you already are, and that still leaves you plenty of cap space left over to do the things Rick's going to want to do, and maybe sign a defensive tackle. I heard some people suggesting Star Lutulele, who is going to leave the Panthers. That would be a cool hire, or extending guys like Barr and Kendricks and Daniil Hunter and Diggs and Waynes, like all those guys have contracts coming up. They're not UFAs this year. They're not dire, but Rick Spielman likes to do that, like the training camp before. And you'll have plenty of money left over to do that. So I think we're in a pretty good position, and I think it's just a matter of making the choice. But it'll come down to the OC, and this will be a very interestingly formative offseason for the offense.
It absolutely
And
does.
I think part of that.
What do you think?
Well, just
Go
real
ahead.
quickly, outside of the offensive coordinator is what their plan is for free agency and the draft. Bringing in Bradford would be a huge commitment to saying that we need to fix this offensive line even more than we did last season. I can't imagine, as much of a Bradford guy as I am, him having the success Keenum had this year with this offense, just because Keenum could basically run for his life, and Bradford isn't very good at that.
It would look different. He would get rid of the ball instead of run away, and we wouldn't really be knowing the difference. And I don't know if that would be better or not, but it would certainly look different.
Yeah, you would think that. Well, yeah, it would be. There's so many variables there. You think getting rid of the ball versus extending plays would be better. But my point is that we just need to really look at the offensive line too. I know you brought up the defensive tackle, but offensive line.
When you're picking
get
30
some guards or whatever.
When you're picking 30, you're probably going to grab a offensive line that dropped. So I'm hoping so anyway. But
there's a lot of tackles in this class. Somebody will be there at 30.
yeah. what do you think about, talking with Purple Buckeye, he made some great points about wanting Stefanski, and I said, well, that assumes that they want to keep the same offense because he would be the next guy to lead that. But what do you think? What do you think if they want that? Why do you think they're going to bring in Darrell Bevel? Because that guy.
I have a rant about this. I have thoughts on this offensive coordinator situation. I'm in lockstep. Was Ted was wanted Stefanski too? Because I'm all in for Stefanski. I think he's the best option available to us outside of if we could get a John Morton or John DeFilippo, these guys who are proven to be better. But right now the names that I've heard are Mike McCoy and Darrell Bevel, and neither of those move the needle for me at all. Mike McCoy is an average whoever that got Peyton Manning for 1 year and then became a head coach, and now he's he was a good enough offensive. No, he wasn't. He was a crappy offensive coordinator for a bunch of years. And Darrell Bevel did nothing really in Seattle except ride Russell Wilson's coattails. But I love how
bring him in then. Why did they bring him in? If Stefanski is a guy, you're going to keep the same offense. You want to bring up this up-and-comer. And I threw out as devil's advocate, you go get someone who's established in the position rather than maybe Stefanski's not ready. But I'm not saying he's not. I'm just saying why. Well, I try to look at what they're doing, and they're bringing in Bevel. If Stefanski's your guy, and this offense is what you want, why bring him in? I mean,
I don't mind interviewing other people just to see what's up.
Or to create
but I would much
a demand from the guy that you want to maybe think that they have other options, so I should sign with them or something.
Yeah, there's lots of reasons to just interview folks and just see. But
why? Hire Stefanski, and then you can start figuring out who your quarterback is, and then you can start, where you're already behind 2 weeks because you've been in the playoffs that long. Why, if that's what you're going to do it and quit. With all due respect, he's not. What are they? The Rooney Rule. Darrell Bevel's not a Rooney Rule guy. Why are they doing this if they're not? If it's just, I don't.
Maybe they don't know what they want to do.
Yeah,
that's a pretty
makes
obvious,
sense. It makes sense to see if to ask Darrell Bevel some questions. Hey, is your scheme different? What was it like with Childress? And do you think it I kind of throw out his time here because Childressed it. But, what have you learned since last time you were here? I think there are questions worth asking to him. He doesn't move the needle for me, and I don't want them to hire him, but I don't mind asking questions. But I think the biggest thing for me is I don't really want somebody who's an established offensive coordinator because the play calling in the NFL has been putrid for 4 years because there's no new ideas and everybody's figured out how to defend it all. And everybody just wants to do things like they were done in the mid-2000s with LaTainian Tomlinson and Peyton Manning in his prime.
Were you bothered by what you saw happen across the border today?
What happened across the border today?
The Packers signed Patine and Joe Philbin or whatever. I can't think of his name. They brought back Joe, the guy from Miami that they used to be at the Packers as an offensive coordinator.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm happy about that because I don't think it'll work out very well because neither of those guys are very good.
Okay, good. That's what I want.
Philbin, it doesn't matter who the offensive coordinator in Green Bay is. They have Aaron Rodgers. Everything will work. But I don't want a blue blood. I want a new blood. I want a young person with new ideas.
I got a question.
I want somebody who has experience in multiple schemes, and I want somebody who is familiar with the players that he's going to be coordinating. That's Stefanski. He's familiar with the players that and the weapons that he has at his disposal. He's familiar with their skill sets, and he worked with the tight ends. He worked with the quarterbacks. He's worked with the scheme. He worked under Norv Turner's scheme. He worked in Bill Musgrave's scheme, and he worked in Darrell Bevel's scheme. That's a lot of different information and a lot of different experiences that you can then pull together and take the good concepts from. One of the biggest things I learned about offensive coordinators from Pat Shurmur's success this year is that it's really valuable to learn somebody else's scheme when you have your own. He had his stupid West Coast thing, and it was bad, and then he learned under Norv Turner and Chip Kelly, brought concepts from both of those guys into this season, and it was excellent. And I love that Stefanski already has that experience, and I also love that he's not just some dude that was like Mike McCoy was just friends with John Fox, and that's been his whole career. He's been 10 years of just being friends with John Fox. Stefanski was promoted with a new head coach in the room.
I don't know.
And I was gonna say too. Just going off of what Luke just said, and kind of.
Don't listen to.
The Shurmur thing over the season. Luke didn't like Shurmur that much or at all before the season started, and the reason that he was successful was because he was able to adapt to change. What the players on this offense, basically the two most important players offensively, got injured, and we had a completely different offense. Norv Turner basically retired because he couldn't deal with that, among other things. So
he's back in the league, baby.
Yeah.
Ruining Cam Newton.
So having somebody who isn't, like Luke said, that isn't coming in here with a system they've run since the 80s and that is really rigid, because with this Vikings team, we know that people get injured and things change, and who knows, they might have to switch from one scheme to another, 3-4 games into the season, or at least adapt to new players in that scheme. So, yeah, I've always been...
It's a huge advantage to have the ability to do that, because you can say, oh, hey, this team has a weakness at safety. Let's go with a deeper scheme. And then, oh, hey, this team has a weakness at linebacker. Let's go with a more West Coasty scheme. If you can bounce between those, game to game to game, that becomes a huge, huge advantage.
Totally. Me and my dad always talk about how similar the thought in the NFL has been to, like, the military, just how, like, rigid and stuck in their ways they are, and how a lot of the same guys, will be terrible at one thing, then get fired, and then get another job and get bounced around for 30 years. A lot of the same faces that are coordinators in this league are people that were coordinators when me and Luke were 10 years old, or head coaches, then back to coordinators. So get some new blood.
I would love to see him get it if he's ready. If he is, then freaking hire him. Just hire him. Just let's move on. Because he knows the quarterbacks. He knows all three of them.
Totally. That's like the biggest
He knows exactly what he would want to.
Yeah.
And I would trust that because he's intimately familiar with all of them and their skill sets.
Big time. And it's not fair, really, to associate Bevel with Childress as much, like Luke said, because Childress was trying to be the Andy Reid of the Vikings, and he was really stuck on developing T-Jack, which was probably one of the darkest periods of Vikings football outside of the Spurgeon win era, I think, in my life. But
got a Super Bowl.
I just can't have any
on the back of defense.
With
there's an interesting article over at fieldgoals.com, the Seahawks version of the Daily Norseman, about Darrell Bevell and how this was the weirdest year for him. He was really famous here for the run pass punt, and he brought that over to Seattle, and they ran that in Seattle, a very run heavy, very. When Russell Wilson was a rookie, they were kind of taking the ball out of his hands for the first couple years, and there was a lot of, run or run pass, a lot of running on first down. And this was the first year that he actually bucked that trend, and it got really unorthodox and crazy and way, way, way less predictable. I think ultimately Bevell in Seattle, you have to adjust for the fact that he had a Tom Cable offensive line with almost no resources put into it, and that really just tanked everything he was trying to do. But I don't think there's anything about Darrell Bevell's time in Seattle that makes me think he's A, like, grown as an offensive coordinator, or B, like, showed anything special that makes him like the guy that can take us, over that hump and take us further in the playoffs, or give us an offense that matches the defense in terms of quality. I don't think there's anything Darrell Bevell brings other than
There's one thing.
T-Jack.
I heard through the deep state that he's heading to Hattiesburg on his way here next.
Hey,
there it is.
Well, he's there. Kevin
fit.
Stefanski got the interview to Zimmer's Ranch. He got the invite to Zimmer's Ranch, so that's big time.
Brett Favre is like 50% copper at this point. The Favre bot. It turns green when it's moist outside.
All the pieces are fixed.
He's thrown to high school kids. Yeah. Are you guys surprised at all? Like, I saw the headline, suddenly Shurmur a much harder sell to Giants fans after the Eagles game, and a lot of them are, like, really mad about how he runs on first down all the time, and they're basically, it's all doom and gloom, which is, not out of character for that region, as we learned as Vikings fans were treated with such high class and respect out in Philadelphia.
If he lands one of the quarterbacks the Vikings don't sign, then they'll be a little happier with him.
Well, I
just don't think the NFL should expand to hostile nations anymore.
The word is they're committing to Eli for another year, and so there goes the Shurmur-Keenum tandem, I guess. But just real quickly, any thoughts on him going to New York? If you think that's a disaster, like they do, or think he has a shot? He's got to face the Eagles twice a year. That'll be fun.
Eli's worse than Keenum. And I don't think it's particularly
no
close.
question. No question. He has been for a couple of years.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
They've got the receivers. They've got Sterling Shepard and Odell Beckham is a nice duo. I don't think it's quite Diggs and Thielen, but it's a nice duo to work with. Their offensive line is garbage, and their running game is garbage. So it'll be interesting to see if he can pull that together and or like run an actual defense.
Eli's a placeholder, you know.
Yeah, it's got to be hard to be.
I hope that they draft someone for the fans of the New York Giants. I hope they draft someone.
You know, obviously, when you bring in a new coach, it's a couple year plan, but it's got to be kind of rough to go into a team that's basically just got a guy there out of respect for winning 2 Super Bowls and because his name is Manning, and realizing that this whole season's basically a scratch. Especially
I'll be rooting for him.
Especially
he learned a lot and he earned a second chance. I hope it goes well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a good guy.
I think we'll talk about some of the quarterback free agency market stuff, like the Kirk Cousins stuff, next week, because we're kind of up against it a little bit, and I want to make sure we can get really into some of the Kirk Cousins stuff, since it seems like some of the writers on Vikings territory have evolved on that issue and are kind of a little bit more interested in that idea than they were before.
I'd rather say Kirk's cousin than Kirk's cousin.
You like that?
Thank you.
Well, I'll put it out there right now, and I'll say this next week. I always preface my articles and what I say with maybe too many different disclaimers, but obviously Kirk Cousins is a Big Ten guy, so I'm going to have a little bit of support for that move. I think
someone's going to pay him like $150 million, and they'll totally price us out of the market. There's going to be like 6 teams in the market for Kirk Cousins. We'll get destroyed in that thing.
Yeah, it's the cost is the only issue for me, but I mean the dude's a year off of a 5,000-yard season. I don't know what my basic point is. I don't understand what the Redskins are doing, but those are the Redskins, so they always do crazy crap.
I don't know. Some teams really hate their good quarterbacks.
Well, we have 3 good quarterbacks, so we'll talk about that next week too. Kind of get into the evolving door or the evolving issue in the revolving door. But I wanted to.
Luke, I'm sorry. What was your prediction? I wanted to hear your bold prediction.
Yeah.
My bold prediction from the Eagles game?
Yeah.
It was that nobody would neither of them would throw an interception, so that went kaput real fast.
Okay. Never mind. I didn't mean to bring it up because I just couldn't remember what it was. And I was hoping yours was right because Joe and I were blowing out of the water. So.
Yeah, and I called a win. We all fell apart at the end.
Just like the team. And it's from a lack of leadership, and I'll own that. I tried to change things up, and it didn't
We
work.
just weren't into it, really.
When I made that prediction, my emotions were just overwrought. So.
Yeah, see, that's how important it is. But one great thing that I know you guys are psyched about that we should also say before we go is the Pro Bowl, huh? Yeah.
Skills competition on Thursday.
Yeah,
this is the spot where you put in the cricket thing.
The gif of a
skip the game but watch the dodgeball.
There used to be a game for Sega Genesis called NFL Quarterback Contest or Quarterback Club or something that was based on the games they used to do back in the day with Favre on his knees throwing the ball and seeing what quarterback could throw it the furthest or moving targets. It was one of the best games ever, and that was what was fun about the Pro Bowl back then. I know they're kind of doing some more of that, but it's going to be hard to watch any Viking play to be genuine about the Pro Bowl. I saw some pictures of Rhodes covering Thielen and Harrison Smith out there. They were all kind of laughing, and it was just like, God, I know you have to move on, but it's hard to stomach seeing that.
About the Pro Bowl a couple years ago, they were trying to interject some things, and some of the stuff was good, and I just said they got a long ways to go, and I announced that I was ripping it. And I don't really rip a lot of things. I ripped it, and boy, did I get ripped for ripping it. Leave it alone! Leave it alone! Are you kidding me? These guys are not playing football. Don't do this. Just stop. They made some things to make it a little better, but ultimately it's totally an exhibition. There's no reason to watch unless you're sitting there looking for a nap on Sunday afternoon between them.
It's really impossible to watch if you're a playoff team that just like imploded. I think it's fun if you're an up and coming team and you have like when Adrian Peterson kind of would go, and he was like the guy for the Vikings that ran the whole offense, but we weren't expecting him to win the Super Bowl or anything, so the expectations were lower, so it was kind of fun to see that.
MVP, baby.
Yeah.
MVP. Yeah, it was nice when I was a kid, but that was a long time ago, so it hasn't been.
It'll be fun to watch the skills competition. I loved it last year. It was a ton of the dropping footballs from drones, and I think it was Patrick Peterson and Antonio Brown, or maybe it was Odell Beckham, all got into this just heated back and forth of like one person outdoing the other, and it was just this like excellent content. And the dodgeball was hilarious. Alex Smith was like one-hopping dodgeballs. It was amazing.
Wouldn't it be great if someone tore their ACL playing dodgeball, like a $150 million guy?
Fellas, we have the Super Bowl here, regardless of the fact the Vikings aren't in it.
And we didn't even talk about it.
Exactly. So we actually talked about the Pro Bowl. So, okay.
I will say before we go, I do think that I did find it very refreshing because I did put another one of my disclaimers before my article on the Vikings team, that this doesn't mean I'm not a fan or that I'm a better fan than anybody else just because I got a lot of crap for my response to Blair Walsh and people were saying I'm not a real fan or that I care too much and I need to get a life, that sort of thing. And there didn't seem to be hardly any of that, at least where I was checking. I think fans were all equally devastated, and they weren't being confrontational, which was really cool. It seemed like everyone, especially our followers on Facebook and Twitter, were really trying to come together and kind of grieve as a group, as much as that sounds funny, as it's just football. But so I want to thank the people that just.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say I wanted to thank our listeners and our followers for being super civil and just really awesome. So what were you gonna say?
Luke kind of nailed it. 2 years ago, the Vikings were they should have gone to the second round of the playoffs, save for a Blair Walsh kick. They were ascending. And then you looked at them that time and said, okay, by 2018, they should be ready to play in the Super Bowl, because they were moving in that direction. Then 2016 happened and knocked it off, knocked it back a notch. So now they got to build back up, and that's where they're going. So they're still a team that's ascending.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at some of the national, as I have to do that every week, I bring up national coverage of the Vikings, and I might as well do that right now. And looking at some of the predictions for this team before the season by the so-called experts, and they were, picking us to be third in the division and stuff like that. And that was with Bradford and Dalvin Cook, who obviously they hadn't seen. But so yeah, maybe I should personally just put it in perspective a little bit. Maybe I got a little too hyped up about this team of destiny thing. And
get a road grader guard next year and to block for Dalvin Cook, and watch out.
Go get somebody from the Big Ten, and I'll be happy. I'll be back on the bandwagon. But yeah, this has been the post-mortem edition of the Purple Journal podcast. I was going to go with something more profanity laden, but the greater good succeeded on that. I want people to definitely check out our message board. We just gave away some tickets to the Super Bowl experience, thanks to the Super Bowl hosting committee, which was awesome. Follow us at Purple PTSD on Facebook and on Twitter. Follow our sister site Viking Territory on those same platforms. And check out the articles from Joe and Luke as well, because this is some of the best content that I think we've ever had, and I'm super proud of our website. So check it out, and come back next week, and we'll have some more awesome topics to cover. Thank you, and Skol. That was draining.